What happens when a mother's worst nightmare unfolds at 30,000 feet? When a quiet flight turns into a public trial fueled by prejudice and privilege? You're about to hear the story of Dr. Imani Johnson and her 8-year-old son Ryder. It's a story that starts with a confrontation over a seat, but quickly spirals into a battle for dignity and truth. But the real shock isn't the venom of the accuser. It's the stunning defense from a little boy who saw everything. Stay with us as we unravel how one child's incredible observation not only saved his mother's reputation, but unleashed a torrent of karma so severe it would dismantle an empire. This is the story of Ryder Johnson, the boy who became a legal giant before he even lost his first tooth. The recycled air of the Boeing 777 hummed with the familiar drone of a journey about to begin for Dr. Imani Johnson, a pediatric cardiologist renowned for her work in congenital heart defects. This flight from New York's JFK to a medical conference in London was a necessary ritual. Beside her, nestled into the window seat, was the center of her universe, her 8-year-old son, Ryder. Ryder was a vibrant spark of a boy, with eyes that held a curiosity far beyond his years. His tightly coiled hair was neatly trimmed, and he clutched a worn copy of The Martian, a book technically for older kids, but one he was devouring with an analytical fervor that both amazed and amused his mother. For Ryder, this trip was pure magic. His first time crossing the Atlantic. His first time seeing the city where Sherlock Holmes and Paddington Bear lived. Imani smiled, watching him trace the rivets on the wing outside. She smoothed down her tailored blazer, feeling the familiar pre-flight mix of exhaustion and anticipation. She had just finished a grueling 48-hour shift at Columbia Presbyterian, and her keynote address in London was in 3 days. This trip was a delicate balance of work and a much-needed mother-son adventure. The boarding process was in its final chaotic phase. Passengers jostled for overhead bin space, a symphony of rolling wheels and muffled apologies. It was in this chaos that the first discordant note was struck. A woman, probably in her late 50s, with a helmet of perfectly coiffed blonde hair and a face that seemed permanently etched in a state of mild disapproval, stopped abruptly at their row. She was dressed in an expensive-looking cream-colored pantsuit, and a large, ostentatious leather tote bag bearing the initials CS was slung over her shoulder. This was Caroline Sterling. She glared at the seat between Imani and Ryder, then at Imani herself. Her gaze lingered for a fraction of a second, too long, a subtle but unmistakable appraisal that Imani had felt 1,000 times before. It was the look that questioned her presence in a space like this, the business-class cabin. "Excuse me," Caroline Sterling said, her voice sharp and brittle. "I believe my bag is under your seat." Imani looked down. There was no bag. Ryder's small backpack containing his tablet and the aforementioned book was tucked neatly under his own seat. Her carry-on was in the overhead bin. "I'm sorry, I don't think so," Imani replied politely, offering a small, disarming smile. "There's nothing here." Caroline huffed a sound of profound irritation. "I put it there myself. It's a small black clutch, from my tote." She gestured impatiently, as if Imani were being deliberately obtuse. A flight attendant, a young woman named Sarah, with a warm but weary expression, approached. "Is there a problem, ma'am?" "Yes," Caroline snapped, turning her full attention to Sarah. "This woman," she said, flicking her eyes towards Imani, without actually looking at her, "has apparently misplaced my clutch. It was right there." Imani's smile faded. "Ma'am, with all due respect, I've been sitting here for 10 minutes. No one has approached this row until you did. There is no clutch here." Ryder, who had been watching the exchange with silent intensity, piped up. His voice was clear and high. "We didn't see a bag, lady. I was looking at the floor for my crayon." Caroline Sterling's eyes narrowed, finally landing on Ryder. It was not a kind look. "Children should be seen and not heard," she muttered before turning back to the flight attendant. "I need you to handle this. My wallet, my phone. Everything is in that clutch." The flight attendant, Sarah, knelt down her professionalism, a thin veil over her exasperation. She ran her hand under Imani's seat and the empty middle seat. "Ma'am, there's truly nothing here. Perhaps you left it in the lounge." Caroline's face flushed a blotchy red. She snatched her large tote from her shoulder and began rummaging through it dramatically. After a few seconds of theatrical searching, she pulled out a small black clutch. She held it up for a moment, a triumphant glint in her eye, before tucking it back into the tote without a word of apology. She then crammed the oversized tote into the overhead bin directly above Imani's head with a loud thud. "Problem solved," she said curtly to the flight attendant, before squeezing past them to take her own seat across the aisle. Imani took a deep, steadying breath. It was a non-incident, a moment of manufactured drama, but it left a sour taste in her mouth. It was a power play, a way of establishing a hierarchy. She felt Ryder's small hand slip into hers. "Mom, why was she so angry?" he whispered. "Some people just have a lot on their minds, sweetie," Imani whispered back, squeezing his hand. "Don't you worry about it. Let's think about what we'll see first. Buckingham Palace or the Tower of London?" Ryder seemed to accept this, turning his attention back to the window as the cabin doors were sealed and the safety demonstration began. But Imani couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The storm had passed, but the air was still charged. Caroline Sterling was settled in her seat, but her eyes, cold and calculating, kept drifting back to their row. This, Imani felt with a sinking certainty, was far from over. The ascent was smooth, a graceful climb into the darkening twilight sky. Below, the glittering expanse of New York City shrank to a web of light before disappearing beneath a blanket of clouds. For a while, a fragile peace settled over the cabin. Dinner service began, the clinking of cutlery and murmured conversations providing a soothing backdrop. Imani helped Ryder with his meal, cutting his chicken into small pieces. They talked in low, happy tones about his school project on the solar system and the exhibits they hoped to see at the London Science Museum. For a moment, Imani allowed herself to relax the unpleasant encounter, before takeoff fading into the background hum of the Rolls-Royce engines. The peace was shattered by a sudden, sharp cry from across the aisle. "Oh, for heaven's sake!" Caroline Sterling exclaimed, her voice slicing through the cabin's quiet. Everyone turned. Caroline was dabbing at the sleeve of her cream-colored pantsuit with a napkin. A small, dark stain, presumably from her red wine, marred the expensive fabric. Her glare was aimed like a laser, not at her own unsteady hand, but directly at Ryder. "Look what you made me do!" she accused, her voice rising in pitch. Imani froze, a piece of chicken suspended on her fork. "I'm sorry. Your son," Caroline pointed a trembling, manicured finger at Ryder. "He keeps kicking my seat. He jolted me, and I've spilled wine all over my suit. This is vintage Chanel. Do you have any idea how much this costs?" Imani looked down at Ryder. His feet were planted firmly on the floor in front of him. He was small for his age. His legs were not long enough to reach the seat in front of him, let alone the one across the aisle. "Ma'am," Imani said, her voice dangerously calm. My son's feet can't even reach your seat. He hasn't moved. I am not a liar, Caroline shrieked, now standing up, drawing the attention of everyone in the front half of the plane. He has been kicking and fidgeting this entire time. It's completely unacceptable. People who can't control their children shouldn't be allowed to fly, especially not in business class. The final two words hung in the air, thick with insinuation. Especially not in business class. The subtext was clear. People like you don't belong here. Imani felt a familiar, hot surge of anger, an emotion she had spent a lifetime learning to control. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up, placing herself slightly in front of Ryder. She was a respected doctor, a leader in her field, but in this moment, she was reduced to a stereotype. My son did nothing, she said, her voice low but firm, each word precisely enunciated. You spilled your wine, and you are looking for someone to blame. I will not allow you to blame my child. Sarah, the flight attendant, rushed over, her face pale. Ma'am, please, let's just calm down. Let me get you some club soda for that stain. Calm down. Caroline laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. I am being harassed by this person and her unruly child, and you want me to calm down. I pay a premium for this service, for a peaceful and comfortable flight, not to be assaulted and have my property ruined. The word assaulted was a match on gasoline. The cabin erupted in murmurs. A few passengers looked at Imani with suspicion, their minds poisoned by Caroline's hysterical performance. Others, thankfully, looked at Caroline with disbelief. That's a very serious accusation, Imani said, her heart now pounding in her chest. The professional composure was cracking. And it is completely false. You are creating a disturbance and making my son afraid. Ryder had shrunk back into his seat, his book forgotten. His lower lip trembled, and his wide eyes were fixed on Caroline, then on his mother. He looked small and terrified. Seeing his fear was what broke Imani's restraint. You will stop this now, Imani commanded, her voice rising. You will sit down, and you will not speak to me or my son again for the remainder of this flight. Or what? Caroline sneered, stepping closer into Imani's personal space. Her breath smelled of wine and malice. What will you do? Are you going to get violent? I wouldn't be surprised. I'm sure your kind are prone to that. The slur was no longer subtle. It was a direct, venomous strike. Imani felt the blood drain from her face. She was speechless, momentarily paralyzed by the sheer unadulterated racism of the comment. She felt the stares of the other passengers, a mixture of pity, embarrassment, and for some, she feared agreement. She had to de-escalate for Ryder's sake, but her mind was a whirlwind of fury and hurt. Sarah, the flight attendant, finally found her voice. Ma'am, that is completely inappropriate. I'm going to have to ask you to return to your seat, or I will be forced to inform the captain. You should inform the captain about her, Caroline screeched, pointing a shaking finger at Imani. She's threatening me. She's the one who is unstable. Look at her. Who knows what she's capable of? Imani felt trapped. Caroline was spinning a narrative painting her as an aggressive, unstable threat. In the charged atmosphere of a post-9/11 airplane cabin, such accusations were terrifyingly potent. She was a doctor, but in that moment she felt utterly powerless, her credentials and character erased by the color of her skin and the prejudice of a single, powerful woman. She glanced back at Ryder. The fear in his eyes had been replaced by something else, a flicker of intense concentration. His gaze wasn't on Caroline anymore. It was darting around the cabin, observing, processing. and in his small hands, his tablet was now held upright, its small red recording light, blinking silently, capturing everything. The standoff was at its peak. The cabin was a pressure cooker of tension. Caroline Sterling, emboldened by Imani's stunned silence, pressed her advantage. She was playing the victim with practiced ease, her voice a theatrical blend of fear and indignation. "I feel unsafe," she declared to the flight attendant, loud enough for the entire section to hear. This woman became aggressive. "I want her and her son moved, or I want them removed from this flight when we land. I will be filing a formal complaint. In fact, I demand you call the captain right now. I want to report an unruly passenger." Sarah, the flight attendant, was young and clearly out of her depth. She looked from Caroline's furious face to Imani's pale, shocked one. "Ma'am, let's all just take our seats. The captain is busy preparing for our oceanic crossing. We can address this on the ground." "Unacceptable," Caroline barked. "This is a safety issue." Imani's mind was racing. How could she defend herself against such poisonous lies? Every denial would be twisted, every word she uttered used as proof of her supposed aggression. She was a respected physician, a calm and rational person, but in this kangaroo court at 30,000 feet, her reputation was being systematically dismantled. She felt a tear of pure frustration well in her eye, and angrily blinked it away. She would not give this woman the satisfaction of seeing her cry. It was then that a small, clear voice cut through the tension, sharp as a shard of glass. "You're not allowed to lie like that." All eyes turned to Ryder. He was no longer cowering in his seat. He was standing on it, his small frame radiating an intensity that was startling. He held his tablet in front of him with both hands like a shield. Caroline scoffed. "Oh, listen to this. The little menace has something to say." Ryder ignored her, his eyes fixed on the flight attendant, Sarah. He spoke with the careful, deliberate cadence of a child trying to explain a complex rule he has just learned. "My mom is a doctor. She helps sick kids. She doesn't get aggressive," he said, his voice unwavering. "You said I kicked your seat, but my feet don't reach, see?" He sat down and stretched his legs out. They dangled a good 8 inches from the floor. "It's physically impossible." A man in the row behind them, who had been watching intently, nodded almost imperceptibly. Ryder stood up again. "Then you said my mom was threatening you. But she just told you to stop yelling because I was scared. Asking someone to stop yelling isn't a threat. It's a request." He took a breath, his small chest puffing out. This is where the atmosphere in the cabin shifted from tense drama to utter astonishment. "And you said bad words about her?" Ryder continued, his brow furrowed in concentration. You said your kind are prone to that. That's prejudice. And when you tell lies about someone to make other people think bad things about them, that's called defamation of character." A collective strident gasp seemed to suck the air out of the cabin. The words prejudice, defamation of character sounded utterly bizarre coming from an 8-year-old. Imani stared at her son, her own shock momentarily eclipsing her anger at Caroline. Where had he learned that legal dramas? They watched them together sometimes on lazy weekends. He would sit there seemingly engrossed in the animation on his tablet, but he was always listening, always absorbing. He was a sponge for information, his mind a steel trap for details. Caroline Sterling was for the first time speechless. Her jaw worked, but no sound came out. She looked as if she'd been struck. Ryder wasn't finished. He held up his tablet, the screen facing outward. "And I recorded it," he said simply. I pushed the red button when she started yelling the second time. It's all on video. What you said, what my mom said, everything. So we don't have to argue about what's true." He looked at Sarah, the flight attendant. "The evidence shows she is the one creating the disturbance. And Rule 25 of the Conditions of Carriage for this airline says you can remove a passenger who endangers the safety or comfort of other passengers." "She's not comfortable," he said, pointing at his mother. "And I'm not comfortable." The silence that followed was profound. It was broken only by a low whistle from the man in the row behind. He was a distinguished-looking man, with graying temples, wearing a smart blazer. He leaned forward. "I'm Marcus Thorne," he said, his voice calm and authoritative. He handed a business card to the stunned flight attendant. "I'm a corporate litigator with Blackwood and Finch, and I can attest to everything the boy just said. The woman in seat 12B," he said, nodding at Caroline, "has been the sole aggressor in this entire incident. The child's summary of events is not only accurate, it is legally astute. He is correct about the definition of defamation, and his citation of your airline's own rules is, well, it's brilliant." He looked at Ryder with a mixture of awe and amusement. "Young man, when you're ready for law school, you give me a call." The spell was broken. Sarah, the flight attendant, now had her footing. She looked at Marcus Thorne's card, then at the tablet in Ryder's hand, and finally at the now ashen face of Caroline Sterling. The power dynamic in the cabin had been completely inverted. Caroline was no longer the accuser. She was the accused, and the evidence against her was irrefutable, presented by the most unlikely of prosecutors. "Ma'am," Sarah said to Caroline, her voice now firm and stripped of all hesitation, "please give me a moment. I need to speak with the captain immediately." As Sarah hurried toward the cockpit, Caroline Sterling finally sank into her seat. The mask of outrage had crumbled, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. She had been outmaneuvered, outsmarted, and publicly humiliated by an 8-year-old boy. And she seemed to realize with dawning horror that this was only the beginning. The walk to the cockpit felt to Sarah like the longest of her career. She returned a few minutes later, no longer alone. Following her was Captain Evan Miller, a man with a stern, no-nonsense demeanor etched onto his face by thousands of hours of command. His presence immediately silenced the remaining whispers. The ultimate authority on the aircraft had arrived. Captain Miller didn't address the cabin. He walked directly to the row where the confrontation had occurred. He looked at Imani, giving her a brief, reassuring nod. He glanced at Ryder, a flicker of disbelief in his eyes. Then his gaze settled on Caroline Sterling. "Ma'am," he began, his voice a low rumble that carried effortless authority. "My first officer is flying the plane, but I have been fully briefed by my lead flight attendant. I understand there has been a significant disturbance." Caroline, seeing a new authority figure, attempted to reignite her victimhood narrative. "Captain, thank goodness. I have been threatened and verbally abused. This woman—" "I will stop you right there, Ms. Sterling." Captain Miller interrupted his tone, leaving no room for argument. "I have also been made aware that there is a video recording of the incident." He looked at Ryder. "Young man, may I see that?" Ryder, with a trusting glance at his mother, handed the tablet over. Captain Miller took it, his large, capable hands looking comically oversized, holding the child's device. He stood there in the middle of the aisle and watched the video. The entire cabin waited in breathless silence. The only sound was the faint, tinny audio from the tablet speakers, playing back Caroline's venomous tirade, Imani's desperate pleas for calm, and Ryder's quiet, observant interjections. He watched the entire 3-minute clip. When it was over, he handed the tablet back to Ryder. His face was a thundercloud. He turned his full attention back to Caroline Sterling. "What I have just witnessed," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, "is one of the most disgraceful displays of behavior I have ever seen on my aircraft. You instigated a confrontation based on a falsehood about a missing clutch. You then fabricated a story about being kicked, escalating the situation dramatically. You used abusive, discriminatory, and racist language toward another passenger. You made false, inflammatory accusations of threats and aggression. You, Ms. Sterling, are the sole source of this disturbance. You have endangered the comfort and safety of my passengers and crew." Each sentence was a hammer blow. Caroline Sterling shrank under the weight of his words, her face a ghastly shade of white. "Now we have a problem," the captain continued. "We are an hour into a 7-hour transatlantic flight. Turning this aircraft around and dumping fuel would cost this airline over $50,000 and disrupt the travel plans of 200 people. I will not do that." A flicker of relief crossed Caroline's face. It was short-lived. "However," the captain said, "I cannot and will not have your behavior continue on my aircraft. You are a liability. Therefore, this is what is going to happen. You are going to move. There is an empty seat in the last row of the economy cabin, right next to the lavatories. You will be seated there for the remainder of the flight. You will not speak to any other passenger. You will not speak to any member of my crew unless it is a medical emergency. One of my flight attendants will escort you there now. Upon our arrival in London, you will remain in your seat until all other passengers have deplaned. You will then be met at the jet bridge by Heathrow authorities and representatives from our airline." Am I making myself clear? It was a total public and unequivocal dressing down. Humiliation radiated from Caroline in waves. To be exiled from the pampered cocoon of business class to the ignominy of the last row was a social death sentence. "You can't do this," she hissed a last gasp of defiance. "Do you know who I am? I am Caroline Sterling. My husband is on the board of 3 major corporations. I will have your job for this." Captain Miller didn't even blink. "You can be Caroline Sterling in seat 42E, he said flatly. "As for my job, I am following federal aviation regulations and company policy to the letter. My report will include the video evidence and the testimony of Mr. Thorne, the corporate lawyer in seat 11D. I think my job will be quite safe. Now move." Defeated. Caroline Sterling gathered her belongings, her hands shaking with rage. She refused to make eye contact with anyone, especially not with Imani or Ryder, as a male flight attendant sternly gestured for her to follow him down the aisle. Her walk of shame past the rows of silent, staring passengers was excruciating. The quiet clack of her heels on the cabin floor was the sound of her world shrinking. Once she was gone, a palpable sense of relief washed over the cabin. A few passengers quietly applauded. Captain Miller turned to Imani. "Dr. Johnson," he said, his voice softening considerably. "On behalf of the airline, I am deeply, profoundly sorry for what you and your son have just endured. No one should ever be subjected to that kind of abuse. The middle seat is empty. Please make yourselves comfortable. Whatever you need for the rest of the flight, anything at all, you just ask. It's on us." Imani, overwhelmed, could only nod and murmur her thanks. The captain then knelt down to Ryder's level. "Ryder," he said, a genuine smile finally breaking through his stern facade. "You are a very impressive young man. You were braver than most adults I know. You stood up for your mum, and you did it with intelligence and integrity. You should be very proud of yourself." Ryder, who had been watching everything with wide, serious eyes, finally broke into a small, shy smile. "Thank you, Captain," As Captain Miller returned to the cockpit, Marcus Thorne, the lawyer, leaned across the aisle again. "Dr. Johnson," he said quietly. "That was incredible. But I have a feeling a woman like that won't take this lying down. She threatened the captain's job. She has power and influence. When we land, she's going to start making calls. This might not be over." He offered his card to Imani. "Please take this. If anything comes of this, if she tries to spin this story and damage your reputation, you call me. No charge. I saw what happened. The truth is on your side." Imani took the card, her hand trembling slightly. He was right. The immediate battle had been won, but Caroline Sterling was a woman accustomed to winning the war. A cold dread began to seep back into Imani's heart. The drama on the plane was over, but the real-life consequences were likely just beginning. The landing at Heathrow was shrouded in a damp, grey morning mist. For Imani and Ryder, the rest of the flight had been peaceful, even pleasant. The flight crew treated them like royalty, and other passengers offered quiet words of support. But as the plane descended, Marcus Thorne's warning echoed in Imani's mind. As promised, Caroline Sterling was the last to deplane, met at the door by stern-faced airline officials and 2 uniformed airport police officers. Imani shielded Ryder from the sight, hurrying them towards immigration, wanting only to put the entire ordeal behind them. She checked them into their hotel in Kensington, and for a glorious 48 hours, they immersed themselves in the magic of London. They saw the Crown Jewels rode a double-decker bus and ate fish and chips from a paper cone. Imani watched Ryder's face light up with joy, and she allowed herself to believe the nightmare was over. She was wrong. On the morning of her keynote address, her phone began to explode. Texts from colleagues, emails from her hospital's administration, notifications from news alerts. A story was breaking online, and it was a twisted funhouse mirror version of what had happened on the plane. A prominent gossip and news blog, the Sterling Standard, which Imani quickly realized was a subsidiary of a media company owned by Caroline Sterling's husband, Robert Sterling, had published an exclusive. The headline read, "Heroic businesswoman subdues aggressive, unstable passenger on transatlantic flight." The article, penned by a writer named Jenna Vance, was a masterpiece of fiction. It painted Caroline Sterling as a calm, concerned passenger who had tried to quiet an unruly child. It claimed Imani had reacted with shocking hostility, becoming verbally abusive and physically threatening. The article mentioned Imani by name, citing her as a doctor, and maliciously suggested her erratic behavior raised serious questions about her professional stability. It described Ryder not as a child, but as an out-of-control accomplice to his mother's aggression. The video, it claimed, was selectively edited by the passenger to remove her own provocations. Worst of all, it included a carefully selected photo of Imani taken from her hospital's website, where she was smiling. Next to it was a paparazzi-style shot of Caroline looking distressed and noble, supposedly taken moments after landing. The narrative was clear. The calm, rational white woman had been terrorized by the angry black woman. Imani felt sick. Her hands shook as she scrolled through the comments. While many people were skeptical, a horrifying number bought the story hook, line, and sinker. "Cancel her," one comment read. "I wouldn't want a doctor with anger issues like that near my kids," said another. Her professional reputation, built over years of tireless work and dedication, was being torched in a matter of hours. Then came the second blow. She received an email from the conference organizers. With deep regret, they were postponing her keynote address, pending an internal review of the troubling allegations that had surfaced. They couldn't risk the potential negative press for their sponsors. She was being cancelled. Caroline Sterling, from thousands of miles away, had unleashed her true power, not just wealth, but the power to control the narrative, to shape reality itself. Her humiliation on the plane had been temporary. Her revenge was proving to be devastating. Imani sat on the edge of the hotel bed, the city of London grey and indifferent outside her window. Ryder was still asleep, oblivious. How could she protect him from this? The fight was no longer about a seat on a plane. It was about her livelihood, her name, her very identity. And she was losing. Desperate, she found the business card Marcus Thorne had given her. Her hands trembled as she dialed the international number. "Blackwood and Finch," a crisp voice answered. "Hello," Imani said, her own voice barely a whisper. "My name is Dr. Imani Johnson. I need to speak to Marcus Thorne. It's an emergency." A few moments later, Thorne's calm, steady voice was on the line. "Dr. Johnson, I was afraid of this. I've seen the article." "Don't worry," he said, and for the first time in hours, Imani felt a sliver of hope. She has just made the biggest mistake of her life. She took this off the plane and into my world. And in my world, the truth is not a matter of opinion. It's a matter of evidence. "What can we do?" Imani asked, her voice cracking. "She's destroying me." "We're not just going to defend," Thorne said, a hint of steel in his voice. "We're going to attack. This is no longer just about what happened on that plane. This is about malicious defamation, libel, and tortious interference with your career. Her PR machine is powerful, but I promise you the law is more powerful. And your son, Dr. Johnson, your son gave us the one thing a liar can't defend against an unedited, unimpeachable record of the truth." He paused. "But there's more. People like Caroline Sterling, they have skeletons. Their empires are often built on foundations just as rotten as their character. While she's busy attacking you with lies, we're going to start digging for the truth about her. And we're going to use a detail that only a brilliant, observant little boy would have noticed." Marcus Thorne was a man who thrived in the crucible of corporate warfare. For him, a legal battle wasn't just about motions and filings. It was about strategy leverage and finding the opponent's hidden weakness. Caroline Sterling's public assault on Dr. Johnson was a declaration of war, and Thorne was now mobilizing his entire arsenal. His first move was to counter the narrative. He didn't go to a gossip blog. He went to the most respected journalistic institutions in the world, the New York Times and the BBC. He provided them with Ryder's unedited video. He gave them the flight manifest, which he had his firm legally subpoena from the airline, showing the names of other business-class passengers who could serve as witnesses. He gave them Captain Miller's official flight report, which was a scathing indictment of Caroline's behavior. And he gave them Imani, who agreed to a single, powerful interview where she told her story with dignity and grace. The story exploded. The counter-narrative was not just a rebuttal. It was a tidal wave. The headlines changed overnight. Video shows CEO's wife in racist tirade on flight, and Boy 8 exposes defamatory lies with tablet recording. The court of public opinion, which had been so quick to condemn Imani, reversed its verdict with breathtaking speed. The Sterling Standard blog was inundated with ridicule and accusations of fake news. Jenna Vance, the author of the original piece, deleted her social media accounts. The conference that had postponed Imani's speech issued a groveling public apology and begged her to reconsider offering to fly her back to London at their expense and triple her speaking fee. She politely declined, but this was just the public-facing battle. Behind the scenes, Thorne was zeroing in on the kill shot, and it came from an unexpected place, Ryder's memory. During their first call, Thorne had asked Imani to have Ryder recount everything he saw, no matter how small. "Kids notice things adults filter out," he'd said. Imani sat with Ryder, asking him to remember the angry lady. Ryder, calm now that the threat was gone, recalled it with his usual precision. He described her suit, her bag, her red wine. Then he said something odd. "Her big bag had the CS on it for Caroline Sterling," Ryder said. "But her computer case, the one she put under the seat in front of her after she moved, was different. It was dark green. It had a gold eagle on it, and the letters AAG. Imani relayed this to Thorne, thinking it was a meaningless detail. To Thorne, it was a flare in the darkness. AAG, Thorne repeated, typing furiously. AAG, Avalon Aerospace Group. They were a boutique defense contractor. They went bankrupt 3 years ago amidst a huge scandal. Allegations of bribery, faking test results on components for military drones. The CEO, a man named Richard Finch, no relation to my firm, thank God, vanished before he could be indicted." He was quiet for a moment. Caroline Sterling's maiden name was Finch. Richard Finch was her brother. The pieces began to click into place with terrifying speed. Thorne hired a team of forensic accountants and private investigators. They dug into Avalon Aerospace Group's bankruptcy filings. They discovered that just before the company collapsed, millions of dollars had been transferred to a series of offshore shell corporations. From there, the money trail went cold. Simultaneously, they investigated Sterling Enterprises, the luxury brand empire Caroline ran. It was successful, but not successful enough to explain the Sterling's lavish lifestyle, the multiple homes, the private jet, the 9-figure art collection. There was a gap, a source of dark money that fueled their world. The breakthrough came from the AAG computer case. On a hunch, Thorne's investigators tracked down former disgruntled AAG employees. One, a former executive assistant, remembered that specific custom-made green leather case. She said Richard Finch had 3 of them made. He kept one and gave the other 2 to his closest, most trusted confidants in the company, the only 2 people who helped him orchestrate the fraud. The investigators pulled security footage from JFK on the day of the flight. There, clear as day, was Caroline Sterling walking from her car to the terminal carrying that distinctive green case. The final piece of the puzzle snapped into place. Caroline wasn't just Richard Finch's sister. She was his accomplice. The investigators theorized the case contained not a computer, but encrypted hard drives or ledgers, the missing key to the entire AAG fraud. She was likely flying to London, a hub of international banking, to meet with someone to move the laundered money. "This is it," Thorne said to Imani over the phone, his voice electric with the thrill of the hunt. "This is the whole thing." Her little tantrum on the plane wasn't just about prejudice. It was the panic of a criminal mastermind who thought she was about to be discovered. The initial fuss about the clutch was a bizarre, subconscious attempt to deflect and control a situation when she was feeling incredibly paranoid. Thorne took his findings not to the press, but to the U.S. Department of Justice and the SEC. He laid out the entire case, the connection between Caroline and AAG, the evidence of the laundered money, the testimony of the former employee, and the crucial visual confirmation of her transporting the case. Ryder's observation about a green computer case had unraveled a multi-million-dollar corporate fraud and conspiracy case. The karma was no longer just public humiliation. It was now federal. One morning, as Caroline and Robert Sterling were having breakfast in their palatial Manhattan penthouse, a team of FBI agents smashed through their door with a battering ram. Caroline Sterling. The woman who had tried to ruin a doctor's reputation over a spilled glass of wine was arrested for conspiracy money laundering and obstruction of justice. Her husband, Robert, was also implicated as Sterling Enterprises had been used to launder some of the funds. Their assets were frozen. Their empire crumbled. The news footage showed Caroline being led away in handcuffs, her perfect blonde hair in disarray, her face a mask of utter ruin. The cream-colored pantsuit she had been so precious about was replaced by a standard-issue orange jumpsuit. The trial of Caroline and Robert Sterling was not merely a case of corporate fraud. It became a cultural spectacle, a referendum on the hidden corruptions of the ultra-wealthy. The media which Caroline had so deftly tried to manipulate now turned its relentless spotlight upon her. Every detail was dissected from her designer courtroom attire, which was criticized as brazenly out of touch to her husband's crumbling composure on the witness stand. The story's origin, the conflict at 30,000 feet, was the undeniable prologue to every report, a constant reminder that this vast criminal enterprise was unraveled by an act of petty cruelty and the observant eyes of a little boy. Marcus Thorne had insisted that Imani testify, not as a character witness against Caroline, but as a factual witness to establish the timeline and the context of the libelous article that followed the flight. When Dr. Imani Johnson took the stand, a hush fell over the courtroom. She was not the aggressive, unstable woman from Caroline's fabricated narrative. She was the picture of professional grace and formidable intelligence. Dressed in a simple, elegant navy blue dress, she spoke with the calm precision of a surgeon and the profound dignity of a mother who had protected her child. She recounted the events on the plane, dispassionately sticking to the facts. She described the accusations, the racist invective, and the fear she felt for her son. Then the prosecutor asked about the aftermath. "Dr. Johnson," the prosecutor began, "can you describe the professional impact of the article published by the Sterling Standard?" Imani's voice remained steady, but a flicker of the remembered pain crossed her face. "My reputation, which I have spent 2 decades building, was called into question globally in a matter of hours. I am a pediatric cardiologist. The trust of my patients' parents is the most sacred part of my job. That article attempted to poison that trust. A medical conference where I was scheduled to present years of research cancelled my keynote address. Colleagues I have known for my entire career were calling asking if I was all right, asking if the story was true. Mrs. Sterling didn't just tell a lie. She wielded her lie as a weapon to dismantle my career. The jury was captivated. Her testimony was devastating, not because it was emotional, but because it was so clear-eyed and factual. It painted a portrait of Caroline Sterling, not just as a fraudster, but as a woman capable of calculated personal destruction for the sake of her own ego. The true turning point, however, was when Robert Sterling, having accepted a plea deal, testified against his own wife. He looked like a ghost of his former self, his expensive suit hanging off his shrunken frame. He detailed with a monotone voice of defeat how Caroline had orchestrated the entire money laundering scheme for her fugitive brother, Richard Finch. He confirmed that Sterling Enterprises was the primary vehicle for washing the dirty money from Avalon Aerospace Group. "And the green leather computer case?" the prosecutor asked. "It contained the hard drives," Robert mumbled, refusing to look at his wife. "The original ledgers, the key to everything." She was taking them to a contact in Zurich via London to arrange a new layer of shell corporations. Across the courtroom, Caroline Sterling sat rigid, her face a mask of stone-cold fury. If she felt any remorse, It was buried under layers of rage at the betrayal. She was a queen, watching her kingdom burn her king, having been the one to hand the enemy the matches. The jury deliberated for less than 5 hours. The verdict was a clean sweep. Guilty. On all counts of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. As the foreperson read the word guilty over and over, Caroline did not flinch. She simply stared straight ahead, a statue of defiance. But as the bailiffs moved to place her in custody, her composure finally cracked. A single choked sob escaped her lips before she smothered it. At the sentencing hearing a month later, the judge, a stern woman named Eleanor Vance, delivered a blistering summary. "Mrs. Sterling," she began, peering over her glasses, "this case is about more than just the complex and egregious financial crimes you have committed. It is about a staggering degree of arrogance. You believed that your wealth and status placed you above the law, above decency, and above truth itself." The judge paused, looking at the thick case file before her. This entire house of cards began to collapse, not because of a sophisticated SEC investigation, but because of an act of public bullying. You targeted a mother and her young child using racist tropes, and your perceived power to humiliate and intimidate them. You tried to ruin a good woman's reputation to soothe your own wounded pride. It is a profound irony that in attempting to silence Dr. Johnson and her son, you gave them the very platform that led to your undoing. Your character, it seems, is as fraudulent as your accounting. Caroline Sterling was sentenced to 15 years in a federal correctional facility. Robert received a 5-year sentence for his cooperation. Her fugitive brother, Richard Finch, was eventually tracked by Interpol to a small remote island in Indonesia with no extradition treaty. While he remained free, the fortune he had stolen was now seized by the US government, leaving him a king in a gilded cage with an empty treasury. The Sterling name was stripped from buildings and charity wings. Their assets were liquidated, their homes auctioned off. Their empire turned to dust. The airline, facing a massive lawsuit from Marcus Thorne on behalf of Imani, opted for a swift and substantial settlement. It was a formal public apology, accompanied by a payment that acknowledged not just the distress caused, but the potential career damage. Imani, true to her word, immediately funneled a large portion of it into creating the Ryder Johnson Fund for Justice. At its launch event, held at a modest community hall rather than a lavish ballroom, Marcus Thorne stood at the podium. "We are here today," he said to the assembled crowd of journalists, lawyers, and community leaders, "because of an act of hate. But we are also here because of an act of love. A mother's love that gave her strength, and a son's love that gave him courage. This fund will ensure that the next time a powerful person tries to silence someone with lies, they will not be alone. They will have a voice. They will have a defender." Imani, who had become a reluctant but powerful public figure, spoke about turning pain into purpose. Her life was fuller now, her work as a doctor, complemented by her new role as an advocate. A year later, on a warm spring afternoon, Imani and Ryder were walking along the Hudson River. The city skyline glinted in the sun. Ryder, now 9, was taller, his face beginning to lose its childish roundness. He was still the same curious, brilliant boy, but with a new layer of quiet thoughtfulness. He had been watching the sailboats glide by. "Mom," he said suddenly, "do you think Mrs. Sterling is sorry?" Imani stopped walking and looked down at her son. A year ago, his question would have been simpler. Now it was layered with moral complexity. "I don't know, sweetie," she answered honestly. "I hope she is. I hope she understands the hurt she caused. But being sorry is a choice. Some people never make it." "But she lost everything," Ryder mused, trying to work out the equation in his head. "Because she wouldn't tell the truth, even when the video showed she was lying." "Exactly," Imani said, kneeling down to be at his eye level. "The most important thing, Ryder, more important than being smart or being right, is being true. Your biggest superpower isn't how much you know. It's that you know the difference between what's true and what's not, and you were brave enough to say it out loud, even when you were scared." Ryder looked out at the water, then back at his mother. A slow smile spread across his face, a smile free from the fear and tension that had once shadowed it. It was the smile of a child who felt safe, loved, and sure of his place in the world. He had faced down a dragon at 30,000 feet and learned the most valuable lesson of all, that the truth wielded with love was the mightiest sword there is. Together they continued their walk, two figures, against the vast cityscape their bond forged in a trial of fire, and now stronger than steel. Ryder Johnson's story is a powerful reminder that courage has no age limit, and that truth has no match. In a world where narratives can be bought and twisted, one little boy's clear eyes and honest heart set in motion a chain of events that delivered perfect, undeniable karma. It wasn't just about winning an argument on a plane. It was about the fundamental victory of decency over prejudice, of evidence over lies. Dr. Imani Johnson's grace under fire and her son's incredible bravery show us the strength of family and the importance of standing up for what's right, even when you're scared. What do you think? Was this the ultimate karma? Have you ever witnessed a moment where the truth completely turned the tables? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of justice and courage moved you, please give this video a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more incredible real-life dramas. Thank you for watching.